We can't linger here. The trail leads that way.
But what about the others?
They'll catch up. Let's move.
The autumn wind howled across the Kansas plains in 1889 as Thomas Hawthorne stood at the edge of town, his weathered hands clenched into fists. The former cavalry officer had seen many injustices during his years out west, but nothing prepared him for what he witnessed that cold October morning. 4 young girls, ranging from 6 to 14 years old, stood shivering on an auction platform in threadbare dresses while their uncle, a cruel-faced man named Vernon Pike, shouted their worth to anyone who would listen. Thomas had come to town for supplies, not to witness such barbarity. But the moment his eyes met those of the eldest girl, Sarah, something inside him broke and then hardened like tempered steel. Her eyes held no tears, only a fierce determination to protect her younger sisters, Emma, Lucy, and little Grace Vernon. Pike had inherited the girls after their parents died in a house fire 6 months earlier, and rather than honor his brother's memory, he saw only mouths to feed and bodies to profit from. He was selling them as indentured servants, a practice that, while legally questionable, was still happening in remote territories, where the law's reach was weak. Thomas had spent 15 years building his ranch after leaving the military, working sunrise to sunset to create something meaningful from the harsh land. He had lost his own family to cholera years ago, and the ranch had become both his sanctuary and his prison, filled with memories of what might have been. Now watching these innocent children being bartered like livestock, every protective instinct he thought he had buried roared back to life. When Pike called for bids, Thomas's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a rifle shot. He outbid everyone, paying an outrageous sum that represented nearly all his savings, money he had been setting aside to expand his cattle operation. The other townspeople whispered and judged, assuming the worst about his intentions. But Thomas didn't care about their gossip. He only cared about getting those girls away from their uncle and anyone else who would exploit them. As he led the sisters to his wagon, Vernon Pike counted his money with a satisfied smirk, never once looking at the nieces he had just sold. The ride back to the ranch was silent except for little Grace's quiet sobbing. Thomas wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate against such trauma. Instead, he made a decision that would change all their lives forever. That first night, he gathered the girls in his modest ranch house and made them a promise that echoed through the wooden walls. He told them they were not servants, not property, and not obligated to him in any way. He would provide them a home, food, and safety, asking nothing in return except that they allow him to help them build a better future. Sarah, suspicious from years of disappointment, asked him what he really wanted from them. Thomas looked at each girl in turn before answering with complete honesty that he wanted to give them what had been stolen from him, a family and a purpose. He wanted to prove that even in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the frontier, kindness could still take root and flourish. The girls didn't trust him immediately. How could they after what they had endured? But they were exhausted, scared, and had nowhere else to go. That night, for the first time in months, they slept in real beds with full stomachs, though Sarah stayed awake long into the darkness, watching the door and wondering when the trap would spring. The first year was harder than Thomas had anticipated, not because of the work or the expense, but because of the walls the girls had built around their hearts. Sarah especially kept her distance, helping with chores but never letting her guard down, always prepared to grab her sisters and run. But Thomas was patient, a quality learned from years of working with wild horses and untamed land. He showed them through consistent action that his word meant something, that safety wasn't just a temporary illusion. Slowly, the ranch transformed from a lonely bachelor's homestead into something extraordinary. Thomas didn't just provide for the girls, he educated them. Each morning before chores, he taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic, using whatever books he could acquire from traveling merchants. He taught them about animal husbandry, land management, and business, skills that most girls of that era were never given the opportunity to learn. When neighbors criticized him for wasting education on females, Thomas told them coldly that intelligence had no gender and that these girls would prove more capable than most men he had known. By the second year, something remarkable began to emerge. The girls weren't just surviving, they were thriving and innovating. Sarah, now 16, showed an incredible aptitude for horse breeding and began developing training methods that were surprisingly effective. Emma discovered she had a gift for veterinary medicine, often accompanying the local doctor on farm calls and learning everything she could. Lucy became fascinated with agriculture and started experimenting with crop rotation, techniques she had read about in Thomas's old farming journals. And little Grace, now 8, appointed herself the ranch's official record keeper, maintaining meticulous books that would have impressed any accountant. Together, the Hawthorne Ranch, as it became known, began implementing revolutionary practices. The sisters established the first horse training program in the region that used gentle methods instead of breaking the animal's spirits, a philosophy born from their own experiences with cruelty. They created cooperative agreements with neighboring farms run by widows and other women, forming an informal network that supported each other against the male-dominated ranching establishment. Their success attracted attention, both positive and negative. By 1895, the Hawthorne Ranch had become the most profitable operation in 3 counties, and Sarah Hawthorne had earned a reputation as the finest horse trainer west of the Mississippi. But the sisters never forgot where they came from. Using their prosperity, they established the first sanctuary for orphaned and abandoned children in Kansas, a place where youngsters could learn trades, receive education, and most importantly, experience the dignity and respect every child deserves. They called it Haven House, and it became a model that other states would eventually copy. Thomas watched his adopted daughters become forces of nature, fierce advocates for the vulnerable, and proof that given opportunity and genuine care, anyone could rise above their circumstances. When he passed away in 1902, surrounded by his girls and the dozens of children they had helped over the years, his last words were simple but profound. He told them he had set out to save 4 children, but instead they had saved him, giving his life meaning beyond his own survival. The sisters continued their work for decades, with Haven House expanding into a network of facilities across the West. They never married, dedicating their lives, instead, to creating the world they wished had existed when they needed it most. Historians would later recognize the Hawthorne sisters as pioneers in child welfare and women's rights, but those who knew them understood they were something even more important. They were proof that one person's courage to do what's right can echo through generations. If this story of resilience, redemption, and the power of chosen family moved you, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you true stories of extraordinary people who changed history through simple acts of humanity. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss inspiring tales of hope and courage that remind us what's possible when we refuse to accept cruelty as inevitable. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that even in our darkest moments, there are still those who will stand up and say enough. Together we keep these important stories alive.